Hi, we're out on our range today, and today is our Thanksgiving special. If I've timed it correctly, today's presentation will air early in the morning, at least early in the morning for my local time, on Thanksgiving Day. Now, the purpose of the Thanksgiving special is for those of you who are separated from your family geographically, or perhaps you don't have a family, or you're hiding from your family, whether that's geographically or just down in the basement, and you're not a football fan, and you're sitting at home bored. Maybe we can help alleviate some of that boredom. And it comes with a few caveats. One, you might notice that I'm not wearing my typical range coat. With some of the things we're going to do today, I might be wearing several different outfits by the time we're done. Secondly, today's presentation is not going to be the Cecil B. DeMille-esque polished presentation you're accustomed to. Because some of the cooking segments have to be done in real time and there's no do-overs, and because there's a lot of material that I'm having to film in a fairly short period of time, I don't have the opportunity to do a lot of retakes, so you really are going to have to put up with my Shatner-esque pauses and my very annoying habit of transposing letters and syllables and words. So please bear with me. Now, to start with, I want to address a category of questions that I get asked occasionally. And people will ask me, do I do archery hunting, or do I shoot archery competitions, or what kind of archery equipment do I have, what kind of archery equipment do I recommend, and so on. Okay, let me show you something. Now what I have here is a cardboard box, and inside the cardboard box are other layers of cardboard, and near the back of the cardboard box is the high-tech fleece bullet stop. On the front of the cardboard box, down close to the ground, because rabbits typically are close to the ground, is a rabbit target. Now this is my bow. It's a recurve bow, it's a 35-pound bow. Also I have this pad on my arm. The idea is it protects your arm from the bowstring hitting it. Well, with long sleeves on, I really don't need that. But what it does in this case is it just keeps this sleeve tight so it doesn't get in the way of the bowstring. I also have this green wool Army issue glove insert, which acts as an archery glove. And I'm going to go back 20 yards, and I'm going to try to shoot our rabbit target. Let's see how we do. He's coming right for us. 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 Nobody have a thrombo that actually hit that. Now, yes, I could make excuses like, this is not exactly the latest, greatest, up-to-datest archery equipment. And before today, I think the last time I shot this bow was over 2 years ago. But those are just excuses. What we really see here is a good example of why I don't do anything with archery in this format. So let's do some cooking, and we're going to start with something that actually does not require any baking or cooking of any kind. Jell-O no-bake cheesecake. You might think, what? That seems kind of lame. There's a reason for that. But before we do this, let's take a look at this message from our sponsor. Okay, now I have to point out that we do not have any corporate sponsors. Kellogg's has never heard of me. We do those kind of spoof ads because they're fun and because it's an homage to Bob Beck and the old Camel ads, while at the same time mocking people who in this format have become corporate shills. So let's make our no-bake cheesecake, and this comes with a couple of caveats. One being, that everything has to be done in real time. There's no do-overs. You're going to have to put up with me tripping over words, tripping over stuff, dropping things, whatever. The other is that when I demonstrate any kind of cooking in this format, it's most of the time things I've done before, I've done several times. I can be pretty sure of the outcome. In this case, we're going to do something that I just thought up and I've never even tried. We're going to turn this no-bake cheesecake into a blueberry no-bake cheesecake. Gee, that's what I was talking about. Blueberry no-bake cheesecake by making the crust out of crumbled, unfrosted blueberry Pop-Tarts. So we'll take our Pop-Tarts, and they are just crumbly, but hopefully the stickiness of the blueberry filling will turn it into something we can use as a crust. And we'll see how it goes. Now, while I'm doing this, let me also point out that you might see me handling food with bare hands. I have washed my hands. I am a healthcare professional. I got an A in microbiology. And I understand the concept of asepsis. Now, as I'm mashing this up with the pastry blender, I gotta say, so far, so good. Looks like we might be doing okay. There's what it looks like. Perhaps a little dry, and I'm going to estimate that I need one more. And since I think I need one more, I'm going to use 2 more. If I end up with too much, I don't have to use all of it. If I end up with not enough, I'm going to have to go back and start over again, and that would be a hassle. And crumble all this together. And just looking at it, I'm going to say that that's perhaps a little too crumbly. It's got too much golden flaky tender cakey outside, while not enough ooey gooey rich and chewy inside. So what we'll do is grab a stick of margarine. Yes, everything's better with butter, but for cooking purposes, margarine in a lot of the things I'm making, I think will work a little better. Okay. And as I've mentioned before, you might think that the purpose of a pastry blender is blending pastry. No, it's for cutting in. That's the test question in 8th grade cooking class. Of course that's stupid. Everything I did in 8th grade was stupid. So get that mixed in there. And that's shaken up. And despite the discoloring on the table, yes, I did clean it with soap and water and 409 before we got started. And that might shape up pretty well, but we're going to put in some more butter, margarine. Mixy, mixy, mixy. like something that's going to really be able to be compressed into a crust. Okay. Put that in the pie plate. Squish all that into position. Now, working with this is a little bit stiff. I would think if you did this in your kitchen, where the temperature is probably a little warmer than 33 degrees, it might not be as stiff, might be a little easier to work with. Now, a comment that has popped up quite often has been people speculating or asking questions about the looks I might get or the comments people might make to me when I'm at the grocery buying lots of ribs and lots of bags of oranges. And especially when I'm buying things like 22 liters of soda at one time. I do get some comments. Quite often people asking if I'm going to have a barbecue, and I don't tell them, no, I'm just going to work and I'm going to shoot all of this. Yeah, that tends to get people upset. But interesting, just last week when buying a bunch of ribs, I had the grocery cart full of ribs and pork steaks and several bags of oranges, and I'd gotten quite a few 2 liters. And there was a narrow spot in the aisle where some product was stacked, and so I had to move over so some lady could walk by. And she said something to me in kind of an angry tone. And I didn't quite hear what she said, but it sounded like, well, you look like a pissant. And I thought, I doubt that's what she really said. What did she really say? And of course, I don't say anything to her. I just, okay. And I figured out what she actually said was, well, you look like you're having an event. And I don't know if she thought I was having an epileptic event, or finally, oh, she's talking about all the stuff in the shopping cart. And I thought it was kind of odd that she would feel the need to say anything to me, and even more odd that she would act really angry that it looked like I was going to have a party. Not my fault she didn't get invited to any parties. But anyway, yeah, people say some strange things to me. There's even a worse anecdote that goes with that I'll tell you in a few minutes. Okay, that crust is actually looking, I'm going to say, surprisingly good. It looks a little asymmetrical, but I think that'll work. So now let me get all this cleaned out and we'll look at the instructions on our box of cheesecake. Okay, we've got our cheesecake mix, read the instructions. There's 2 pouches in here, crust and the filling mix. I put the filling mix in the bowl, and you got to make sure that you actually read the instructions where it says filling mix on there. Now, a side note is, when you're out here in the field like this, a lot of times you'll have a campfire going. Don't throw the cardboard box in the campfire until you're done. You might need the instructions. And the instructions in this case say that we need 1.5 cups of milk. Now that sounds like too much, so I'm going to confirm that. 1.5 cups cold milk, okay, which is about that much. Then it says to beat it to beat with the mixer on low speed for 30 seconds. Then on medium speed for 3 minutes. I won't make you sit through the whole 3 minutes of this. Okay, now we've got it mixed. Let's put it in our crust. And the filling will be fairly thick. In fact, that's even part of the instructions on the box. Filling will be thick. Okay. Now, one thing I can see as a problem already is that the pie plate I bought just for this occasion is really a little bigger than it needs to be, because we don't have quite enough filling to completely fill our crust. Then around, even that out. And now we're supposed to refrigerate for 1.5 hours. No, excuse me, refrigerate for 1 hour. So, let's put this in the refrigerator. Well, obviously in the field I don't have a refrigerator, but the ambient temperature is in the low 30s, and I do have this leftover snow. So we'll put that in the snow just like that, and leave it for an hour. So now we have dessert taken care of, and I have my mixing bowl and all the utensils cleaned. So the next thing we're going to make is another dessert. Okay, just in the same sense that sometimes I carry 2 guns, sometimes you need 2 desserts. But before we start mixing any ingredients, there's something else we have to do first. And what we have to do first is get our charcoal started. We crumple up some newspaper. Under there. Newspaper's getting to where it's not as easy to come by as it used to be. And the real key is getting enough charcoal, but not too much. And that's going to be about the right amount. Fire up our newspaper. To me, the best thing about this is it doesn't require the use of any liquid fuels. And we'll just leave that for a few minutes, and it'll get our charcoal going while we're mixing our ingredients. So dessert number 2 is going to be a cake. Now, I'm going to use a cake mix, and that causes some people to get all kinds of bothered. Today's cake mixes are really pretty good, and in the field, a cake mix is far more practical than trying to make a cake from scratch. So I'm going to open this yellow cake mix, and something about these cake mixes, I get this bag, and I find that if I pull it and try to open it, I can't get it, and I can't get it, until finally I pull really hard and it tears everywhere. So it can be a little bit of a trick to open. And again, don't throw the box in the fire until you're done with the cake. You might need those instructions. Now, I'm going to use margarine. Yes, I know butter is better, and margarine is only one molecule away from plastic, or whatever nonsense people like to say. But I find that for cooking, margarine can have some advantages. One of those advantages is it's really better for greasing the pan. And when it comes to Dutch oven cooking, you've got to make sure the pan is greased. And when you think you have enough, put in a little more. You got to get all of that in there. Depending on what you're making, if you don't put a lot of grease in greasing the pan, it can really stick. Okay, so we got about enough in there. Now, let's set that margarine aside for a moment. The instructions on the box call for a ½ cup of vegetable oil. If I put in what is now most of a stick of margarine, and I cut that in with the pastry blender, I find that it can make the cake much more moist. There are some people that are famous for making dry cakes. Yeah, I don't want to be one of them. Also, when you're cooking with a Dutch oven, there's a degree of unpredictability, such as right now my Dutch oven is migrating. And when you put just an extra stick of margarine in the mix, it can give you a little more margin of error when it comes to baking the cake. Okay, we got that. I'm still going to put in vegetable oil, just not the ½ cup that the recipe calls for. A little less than that. About that much. I also need 3 eggs. And a cup of water. And we mix. Now, something that I like to do with the particular type of cake I'm going to make today is I'm going to add a little bit of cinnamon. And when I pull this out of the box, see that's not labeled? Got to make sure it is cinnamon. Okay. And got to be careful. Get in just a little bit. We're not making a spice cake. Okay. Then we'll mix that up some more. Yeah, we're on a little bit of an angle, and the tabletop is still kind of frozen. And get that all mixed up. Okay. Set that aside for a moment. What we're going to make today is a raspberry upside down cake. I'm going to use fresh raspberries. You can get frozen ones, but I find that frozen blueberries, frozen strawberries, they're okay. Frozen raspberries really seem to lose their flavor. That might just be me. Dump those in there. Make sure you get the leaf out. Okay, and we've got what looks like plenty of raspberries. You can see quite a few. Something I've found with this type of cake is that when you think you have enough, you don't. And that really looks like it'll be enough. Take our spoon and mash those down just a little. And that should be pretty good. Now we'll put in our cake mix. A very important thing is that with that many raspberries in there, I won't be able to put in the entire cake mix. If I put too much mix in here, as it rises, it'll touch the top of the Dutch oven. When it comes in contact with the top, that'll burn it. Not the oven, the cake. Just a little more. And that'll do it. Put our lid on, and now let's get this on the heat. Now remember, we want to have fewer coals on the bottom than we do on the top. Too many coals on the bottom, we end up burning it. And part of the reason for making a fruit on the bottom cake like this is it's less resistant to burning. We want to make sure that none of the charcoals, none of the briquettes actually touch the bottom of the pan. Okay. Now we'll put this on top. High-tech charcoal manipulation device. And right now we're really lucky in that there's almost no breeze. The amount of wind you have can really affect baking time. And you'll notice that some of the briquettes aren't really under the cake. Having some heat come up along the sides is going to be okay. And how long this bakes depends on a lot of factors. How much stuff you put in there, the thickness of your Dutch oven, ambient temperature, and wind. And so I can tell you that I'm now going to time this for 20 minutes and then I'll check it. But that's just really a very beginning level time estimation. Your results may vary greatly. Okay, so we'll let that bake. Okay, while we're waiting for that, let me tell you an anecdote. Recently in this format, I mentioned my one Boy Scout story. And a lot of people replied that they wanted to hear it. Well, be careful what you ask for, because here it is. And it comes with a few caveats. First and foremost being that it takes about 20 minutes to tell, and it has an anticlimactic, inconclusive, frustrating end. Now, another caveat is what I'm about to tell you are things that happened over 20 years ago. And back then, it would have been more common that you'd call a 1-800 number than it would be that you would get on a website. Another thing is that I'm going to tell you about some conversations I had with a few people. And so I might say that someone said words to the effect of. That means that I don't recall their exact words, but I'm going to tell you the meaning I got from it. But when I say quote, or I use the air quotes, then I am in fact quoting exactly, to the best of my recollection, what somebody said. Now, The way this goes is that one day, relatively early in the day, about 10:00, I was at home, and it was a weekday, and I was watching a TV show, and a public service announcement comes on from the Boy Scouts. And it's a full minute long ad, and you see all these scenes depicting adults positively interacting with children, good job, Billy, that kind of thing. While a narrator tells you how the Boy Scouts are, quote, desperate, that they need adults to volunteer to be Boy Scout leaders. And then they said something to the effect of, if you think you're not qualified, you're wrong. Anybody who cares about kids or blah, blah, blah is qualified. And I'm watching this thinking, okay, I can do that. Now, I never was a Boy Scout. My brother was a Boy Scout for a while, so I saw some of the things he did. I'm not completely in the dark about what Boy Scouts do. But I thought, sure, I can do that. And I write down their 1-800 number. Okay, I got it right. And as soon as the commercial's over, I call the 1-800 number. Now, a key part of this is the person that answered the phone answered by saying, Boy Scouts of America. So obviously I have the right number. And I tell this lady, hey, I just saw your ad on TV. It says you need Boy Scout leaders, you need people to volunteer, so I'm volunteering. So what do I do? And then she says something to me that's kind of to the effect of, what? Just saw your ad on TV. Said you needed people to volunteer to be Boy Scout leaders. I'm trying to volunteer, so who do I call? Where do I go? What do I do? And she made it pretty clear that she had no idea what I was talking about. And we go back and forth a little bit, and she asks me, are you sure you got the right number? You are the Boy Scouts of America, aren't you? She couldn't argue with that logic. Oh, yeah, then I guess I have the right number. And she asks, when did you see this ad? About 5 minutes ago. And I mean, that just struck her dumb. She didn't know what to do with that. About 5 minutes ago. Okay. Well, she ended up explaining 4 things to me. 1, she's totally unaware of any television commercial. 2, they do not need any volunteers. Now, you hear the way I say that? And that's just about the way she said it. We do not need any volunteers. As if not only do they not need any volunteers, but I'm a moron for thinking they did. 3, even if they did need any volunteers, she would not be the person to talk to. And 4, she can't even begin to comprehend why anyone would have given me her phone number. Okay. But then she asks where I'm from, and I tell her the city and state that I live in. And so she gives me the number for the multi-state regional coordinator's office for that part of the country where I lived in at the time. Okay. So I write that number down, and I call that number. And a man answers the phone by saying, Boy Scouts of America. So obviously I'm in the right place. And I tell him, hey, I saw this ad, gave me a 1-800 number. And it gave you my number? No. I got a 1-800 number. I went back and forth for a couple of minutes. It started looking like a who's on first routine, trying to get him to understand that he was the second person I'd talked to. But when I finally got that across to him, he asks me, are you sure you got the right number? You are the Boy Scouts of America, aren't you? Oh, yeah. And this is the regional whatever? Oh, yeah. Okay, then I guess I've got the right number. And then he asks, when did you see this ad? I told him, about 15 minutes ago. Again, he is just dumbfounded by the notion that I had just seen this on television. This was an ad on TV? Yes. Well, then he explains 4 things to me. Yeah. 1, he's totally unaware of any such ad on television. 2, they do not need any help. And he says it in that same way as if to tell me that not only do they not need help, but I'm an imbecile for thinking they did. 3, even if they did need help, he would not be the person to talk to. And 4, he can't even imagine why anyone would have given me his phone number. But he asked where I live, and I told him the city and state I lived in at the time. And so he's going to give me the number for the head of Boy Scout operations for right there in that city. Now, at the time I lived in a city that had a population of about 100,000 people. So it's not Metropolis, but it's not Smallville either. And so the head of Boy Scout operations for this city isn't going to be the one guy that runs the one local troop. I mean, he's going to be in charge of a relatively big operation. Okay. So I call that number, and I recognize that number as a local area code and a local prefix. And the guy answers the phone by saying, Boy Scouts of America. And I asked him, okay, are you the head of operations for right here in town? Yes, he is. Okay. Now, after the problem I'd had with the second guy, I tried to approach this a little differently. And I tell him, you're the third person I've talked to. I talked to somebody who pawned me off on the regional coordinator, and he says something like, yeah, okay, like he knew what I meant. And that guy gave me your number. Okay. All right, so once I've got that established, I say, now, I just saw this television commercial advertising that the Boy Scouts need people to vote. And it gave you my number? No, remember, you're the third person I talked to. Oh, okay, we're back on track. Once I got him to understand that concept, and I explained that I saw the ad, 1-800 number, called it, and so I'm trying to volunteer to be a Boy Scout leader. He says, you sure you got the right number? You are the guy right here in Mediumsville, right? Then I guess they gave me the right number. And then he asks, when did you see this ad? About half an hour ago. And he is struck stupid by that. Again, it's, he doesn't have, his brain can't even comprehend anything with that. Okay. And then he tells me 4 things. 1, he's totally unaware of any such ad on TV. 2, they do not need any help. And he says it again in that same way that not only do they not need help, but I'm an idiot for thinking they did. 3, even if they did need help, which they don't, he would not be the person to talk to. And 4, he cannot understand at all why anyone would give me his phone number. Okay, but this guy, he's at least willing to talk to me. Now, obviously, at this point, I've realized that, yeah, me volunteering to be a Boy Scout leader is not going to happen. But let's play this through anyway to see where we end up. Now, this guy's willing to talk to me. And he asked me about what I do for a living and this kind of thing and so forth. And I'm telling him things like, I wasn't a Boy Scout, but my brother was, so I'm not completely ignorant. And I know Boy Scouts do things like this and that. And I'm in the military, and I'm in the infantry, and I'm well acquainted with being in the field and that kind of thing. And I also help to teach hunter education classes. And that got his attention. Oh, are you a state certified hunter education? Oh, no, I just act as a guest speaker in a colleague's class. I talk about wilderness survival and that kind of thing. Oh, he's really disappointed that I'm not a state certified hunter education instructor. And I told him that on active duty, when I was in the Marine Corps, I was a marksmanship instructor. Oh, are you an NRA certified? No, the Marine Corps doesn't need a civilian certification. Oh, and that disappointed him as well. And then he ends up telling me that if I would go out and get my state certification to teach hunter education classes, and if I would go get my NRA certification, which I have now, but I didn't at the time, if I were to go get my NRA certification, then, quote, then we might have some use for you, close quote. Okay. Now, I'm trying very hard to be polite, and one of my pet peeves in the world is people who play tough guy on the phone. To me, that's just about the epitome of cowardice. So I don't want to tell this guy what I really think of him at this point. But I ended up saying something to the effect of, so you want me to go out on my own time at my own expense and get certifications for which I have no use whatsoever, just so you might have some use for it. To which he says, word to the effect of, well, yeah, we really don't need any help. Then maybe you shouldn't have put an ad on television. Well, I didn't put an ad on TV. Yeah, that's a quote too. Well, I didn't put an ad on TV. And yeah, that really is how he sounded. Now, again, a pet peeve of mine is, if you hold a significant supervisory position in some kind of organization, when you then absolve yourself of any responsibility of what that organization does, like, he doesn't want to take any responsibility for this ad being on TV, which I know he didn't personally do it, but you're part of that organization. And I told him, yeah, maybe you didn't personally do it, but your organization did. And I ended up saying, yeah, it sounds like you really don't need any help, so thanks for wasting my time. Well, we don't. And that is my Boy Scout story. And looking back on it, and when I really start to think about it, I know that I wrote down the 1-800 number correctly. Again, when I called it, the lady said, Boy Scouts of America. And I made a couple of terrible assumptions. And I didn't even make these assumptions on a conscious level, subconsciously. I assumed, and of course, you know, ass you me when you assume. Seeing this commercial, I assumed that it wasn't the first time the commercial had been on TV. I also assumed that when I called, I wouldn't be the first person to call. I assumed that whoever answered the phone would at least know what I was talking about. Wrong on both counts. And perhaps I should have called that 1-800 number again the next day and see if I got a different person. But it leaves me with this great cosmic wondering of, why is this public service announcement on television when the people that it's supposedly put on for have never heard of it? Why did they use terms like desperate when the 3 people I talked to made it very clear that they do not need any help? Really kind of left me wondering. And, you know, I was in the military, so I'm very much accustomed to government bureaucracy, and somewhere in all of your military manuals, I think you'll find it's a regulation that the right hand is prohibited from knowing what the left hand's doing. But in an organization like the Boy Scouts that depend on a lot of volunteers, you see that same kind of thing. The volunteers don't know what's going on. And so when someone like me who actually wants to help out calls and this is what you get, it's like, so what? I mean, this wasn't Skype. The person couldn't see me. I'm thinking, what, do you know that I'm ugly or something? It was very strange. And it's left me with the thing of really, and I shouldn't feel this way, but really an anti-Boy Scout sentiment. And so in the time since this has happened, like when the Black Powder Club I was in was doing something and the Boy Scouts asked us to help them, someone suggested, oh, Paul, you'd be good at this. No, the Boy Scouts have already made it very clear to me that they do not need my help. So yeah, I'll pass on that. And maybe that's petty of me, but there I am. So that's my Boy Scout story. Now let's go back and see what's happening with what we're cooking. And now let's check our cake. Very crucial thing, getting the lid off without spilling any charcoal into the cake. And I don't even need my knife to tell me that that isn't even close to being done. In fact, we're going to have to fire up some more charcoal and put on here. So I fired up some more charcoal, put that on the Dutch oven with the cake in it, and now I fired up some more charcoal for our main dish. So now that this is going, let's take a look at what the main dish is going to be. Okay, and now for our main course, which is something I'm going to call corned beef and corn. So we've got our Dutch oven, and the first thing we're going to do, as we've done so many times before, is line the bottom of the Dutch oven with bacon. Now, this can flavor what we're cooking. But what it also does is protects the bottom of whatever it is, in this case corned beef, from getting burned. And if our bacon gets burned to a crisp, well, some people like crisp bacon. And if nothing else, we can take the bacon out and throw it away. And it will protect our corned beefs from being scorched. So, we have the bottom of the Dutch oven lined with the bacon. Let me get out our corned beef, which kind of looks nasty in this bag, but so be it. And corned beef has this liquid. In this case, I haven't mentioned this before, it's kind of cold out here today. So although the corned beef isn't frozen, some of our gel has really jellified. So put that in there. What was that where the guy says, oh, somebody blew their nose and you want to keep it? Oh. Well, a lot of times when you buy a corned beef in this form, it comes with some kind of spice packet. And in this case, I'm not seeing one. Oh, there it is. Spice packet I'm not going to use. The main thing is you don't want the plastic thing with the spices in it baking with the corned beef. Much in the way you always have to look for the desiccant pack. So we'll make sure that we don't have the spice packet in there. Okay. And then, once our charcoal gets ready, we'll put some heat on this. So let's go check the charcoal. Now remember, we're doing everything in real time. So before we put the corned beef on the heat, let's see if we need to take our cake off the heat. Top of the cake is browned. Cake is done. So we will just move that off the heat. And in this case, I would typically put the lid back on, but that's done enough. I'm going to leave that lid off until it cools off a little bit. So let's go get started on our corned beef. And our charcoal looks pretty good. Typically, of course, you want to put a lot more coals on top than on the bottom. But in this case, I'll put those few on the top and then I'll fire up some more. So I fired up some more charcoal, put it on the Dutch oven with the corned beef in it, and we're going to cook that for a while before we add the corn. The corned beef has to cook a lot longer than the corn. Now, while we're talking about corn, that brings us to the subject of vegetables, and corn doesn't really count. So, much to everyone's dismay, we have to have a vegetable dish. And so what I have here are some fresh green beans. Now, these tend to still have the stems on them, so I'm going to pick the stems off, and this will be a little bit of a time-consuming process. So again, I won't make you sit through the process of this. So now we've got our little cauldron over the fire. And I'm going to put some water in it, but not all that much. We don't want to boil the green beans. If we're going to do that, we may as well just use canned green beans. So we'll put our beans in there, and for the most part, they'll steam in there. And we're going to cook them, but we still want them just a little bit al dente. Now, don't worry, we're not going to eat just plain green beans, but we'll let them cook for a few minutes first. So our beans have been cooking for about 10 minutes. And they look like they're doing really well. Just a little bit al dente, exactly where we want them. Now let's move to phase 2. Now we have our green beans off the heat, and yes, I am aware of the angle of the sun, but at this time of day, at this time of year, in this part of the country, that's a reality we have to deal with. So, we'll take our green beans and we'll dump not all of the water, but most of the water off of them. About that much. Then we'll add some Campbell's cream of mushroom soup. You knew that was coming. Now, one of the things with Campbell's cream of mushroom soup is that it has cream of, but not a whole lot of mushrooms. So, drain the water off our canned mushrooms. And I'm going to say that that looks like enough mushrooms. We have another can if I decide to add some later. Then we'll add some canned milk. Now remember, the instructions on the cream of mushroom soup are that you put in your can and then you fill this can up with milk or water, so you have equal amounts of soup and whatever you add. We're not trying to make soup, we're trying to make gravy, so we'll add a little bit less. And we'll start with that much. Now, it's okay to have too much gravy, because if there's too much, you can always take that gravy out of the beans and put it on something else. Nothing we're going to cook here today, but whatever you might have. So we'll mix that around in there like that. That looks pretty good. And we'll put it back on our heat, but this time a significantly lower heat. And now our fire's burned down a little bit. But even at that, I'm going to elevate our pots with just a little higher. And then I'll put a little more wood on the fire, but not much more. Now we're going to check on our corned beef. You may notice I moved it. Ran into a little snag in that the ground was so wet over there that the charcoal on the bottom wasn't generating much heat. And as usual, when you take this off, you got to make really sure not to spill any of the dust. And that looks like it's coming along just fine, but it's got a ways to go. Enough so that I'm going to have to fire up some more charcoal to put on top. Now let's go back and check our beans again. So let's see how our green beans are doing. And looks like they're warming up pretty well. Looks like our gravy is going to be thick, but not too thick. Now, sometimes mushroom soups like this can be a little bland, so I am going to add a little bit of spice to it. Now, when I say add spices to a dish like this, I'm not talking about anything fancy. I'm talking about a little bit of black pepper. That's plenty. And a little bit of salt. You don't need very much. And if whoever's going to eat it thinks it's a little too bland, they can add salt and pepper. But again, you can't take the salt out. Now, this is starting to get a little bubbly, which is something we don't want. So we'll move this up about that much. And it doesn't take much to make a real difference. Now our corned beef has been going about 45 minutes. It's not done yet, but it's time to add the corn. So again, carefully take off the lid. The corns are just going to be corns on the cob, and they're minis. And then, of course, to help our corn cook a little bit, we'll put some bacon over it. And the heat from the top will cook that bacon. And then the bacon grease will go down onto the corn. And I have some more charcoal heating up, so we'll replace this charcoal on the top. Okay, so our corned beefs went for about 50 minutes. Then I added the corn, and that's now gone for about 35 minutes. So we should be just about done. Something I've discovered is that today, everything I've been making, the cooking times have been a little more than what I think they typically would be. So we'll poke our corn. Oh yeah, that looks just great. And we'll cut our corned beef. I'm going to say that looks pretty good too. So at long last, it's time to eat. Normally I'd take the Dutch oven over to the table, but this is still pretty hot, so in the interest of the health of the plastic table, piece of corned beef and a mini ear of corn. Let's see how our beans turned out. Now, before we check on our green beans, we have this ear of corn, and I know I've been talking about cooking with margarine, but when it comes to what to put on your corn, butter. Real live butter. Typically, I prefer unsalted butter, but in this case, lightly salted, I think, is applicable. Now, as far as our green beans, they're steaming. They didn't stick to the bottom of the cauldron. They look pretty good. And finally, let's taste some of this. Okay. When you get green beans out of a can, they're mushy and tasteless. But a raw, fresh green bean is hard and chewy. Feels like I've gotten just the right balance between it still tastes like a fresh green bean. Don't let your mom see you doing that. It's got some real taste. It's got some good texture. And it's got the mushroom gravy that we all love. Now, corn on the cob shouldn't be too challenging. That's good. To be blunt, I think it has more to do with real live butter and the quality of this corn than it does with my cooking. Okay. That's good. Now, the corned beef. It doesn't take much to cook corned beef to where it's sufficiently cooked to eat. But if you don't cook it enough, it can be pretty tough. But if you cook it too much, then it's dry and... Getting the right balance. Cooking it long enough, but not too long, so it isn't dried out, but it's still good. But not underdone to where it's too chewy. That can be difficult. This, at least based on the first bite, appears to have turned out perfectly. You can probably actually see some of my gray hair disappearing. Okay. That's perfect. In the interest of full disclosure, it is 1500, and I had one of those protein shakes for breakfast at about 0630, and I haven't eaten since, so that does perhaps taint my perception of what's really good. But wow, okay, that turned out good. Now, I'm really curious to see how our blueberry Pop-Tart crust no-bake cheesecake turned out. Let's give that a try. Okay, I've got the pie out of the snow. The first thing I notice is it's got a grass seed stuck in it, so let's get rid of that. Next, it's got some snow stuck in the bottom of it. Okay. Now, it might say something about the lack of sophistication of my palate, but I found that I really like this no-bake cheesecake better than I do the high-dollar ones that you make. All right. Now, the first thing I'm noticing is it's stuck to the pan. I mean, the Pop-Tart crumbly crust obviously is going to be a little sticky. I got it out of there all in one piece, but I should have put something on there to keep it from sticking. Okay. Try a piece from the back that has a little more crust on it. You know, that tastes probably exactly the way you'd expect it to taste. If you like blueberry Pop-Tarts, which I do, that's really good. You know what would go good with this? Some milk. Again, don't tell your mom that you do this. So all together, I'm going to say that turned out the way I wanted it to turn out, but there's probably better things that you could use to make a crust. Now, let's try our raspberry cake. Now, before we try the raspberry cake, I got to tell you an anecdote. Long time ago, I was in the field and I was cooking some eggs for breakfast. And me being me, I decided that I would experiment with making a Pop-Tart omelet. The Pop-Tarts I used were chocolate frosted Pop-Tarts, which, yes, tasted just as bad in omelet form as you think they did. So, although, what's that show where they have a song, "Have you ever put butter on a Pop-Tart?" Yeah, that is really good. Other than that, I'm going to have to recommend just leave them in their original format. Okay, let's try the raspberry cake. Now, this did get a little more done on the top than I would have really liked, but still within acceptable limits. And it's had enough time to cool off that I should be able to get it out of the pan. And yeah, looks like we sufficiently greased the pan. It didn't stick. I'm gonna have to resort to another instrument to get maximum raspberryness out. Okay. See, when I put all those raspberries in there, that seemed like a lot, but if you look, that's really not that much. It's not overwhelming. And done all the way through, not overdone at all, no scorching of the raspberries on the bottom. However, what I did not do was add anything to sweeten the raspberries. And at this time of year, they can be a little tart. So, again, although milk will go really good with this, what would be really good would be if you had some vanilla ice cream to put on this, the sweetness of which would be offset by the tartness of the raspberries. Unfortunately, although it's as cold as it is, I didn't bring the ice cream with me. However, it did turn out really well. But I would say, for future reference, either put a little bit of sugar on there to sweeten those berries, or vanilla ice cream would really be the key. So all in all, not too bad. Now remember, the purpose of the Thanksgiving special is to help you alleviate holiday boredom and to put out information that may be a little bit useful, perhaps even a little bit interesting, and to have a little bit of fun. And up till now we've been doing that. But now I have to talk about something serious. And it is unavoidable, we have to. And this entails the terrible subject of politics. I like to keep politics out of what I do here for a few reasons. One, I don't like talking about politics, and there's plenty of people out there like Johnny B, Yankee Marshall, Cologne Noir, forgive me if I'm pronouncing that wrong, who do like to talk about politics. I'm also not particularly skilled at talking about politics, while lots of other people like Johnny B, Yankee Marshall, Cologne Noir are, by comparison, far more skilled at talking about politics. There's also the matter of there's a particular type of format called gun channels, and so often places that call themselves gun channels like to talk about politics. I like to talk about shooting and firearms and ammo and home defense and hunting and other things that are gun related, and leave the politics to the people who like talking about it and are good at it. However, if you're watching this on Thanksgiving Day, then the election was a couple of weeks ago, and we passed this referendum. It was on the ballot where a law gets passed by a vote of the population. It passed by a margin of like 1.5%. And it was called Measure 114. And since that passed, we've put out a couple of presentations, and I found that there's a lot of commentary that isn't about the content of the presentation. It's about, hey, Paul, what do you think of 114? And how is that going to affect me? And what is that going to entail? And so we're in a position where we have to discuss it. Now, this comes with the normal litany of caveats and disclaimers, so bear with me. The first one being that some people have voiced their disappointment over the fact that I didn't talk about this prior to the election. Well, when I read commentary, I often read it in the voice that I perceive is the voice of the person who made the comment. And when people make comments like, maybe Paul doesn't talk about politics because he's afraid to. Yeah, when I read that, the way it sounds is, maybe Paul doesn't talk about politics because he's afraid to. Yes, that really is how you sound to me when you write things like that. I dislike talking about politics for all those reasons I already said, and there's also the matter of, if you think that I should champion your political cause, think again, because I'll do it more harm than good. I have found that it's a very common thing that when I suggest a course of action to someone, it only strengthens their resolve to do the opposite of that thing. There's also the matter of that this is a referendum that only affects the people in the state in which I reside. So if I were to talk about it in this format, to the other 99.99% of the people on the planet, it would be irrelevant. Then, most of the people watching me are already very well aware, Measure 114, bad, and they're going to vote no. For those few people watching me that thought it was a good idea and they're going to vote yes, I'm not going to change their minds. And for that minute number of people that are undecided, if I tell them, Measure 114, bad, vote no, that will only strengthen their resolve to vote yes. Been there, done that many times. You want me to tell that? That's not really on point. Okay, I'll tell you an anecdote. Nobody wants to hear about this, but it kind of makes the point. Long time ago, I had a girlfriend that was, in many ways, a very good person. Side note, no Wilberforce, in no ways were you ever a good person. We're not talking about you. Okay. I had a girlfriend that was, in many ways, a very good person, but she had a couple of things that she did that I found very bothersome. And no, there's no double entendre there. And I'm not going to tell you what the things were because that might just strengthen your resolve to do those things. And I found myself quite often having conversations with her that went like this. Will you please not do that? Oh, that didn't hurt you. That's not the point. We had that pretty much exact same conversation many times. To the point where I ended up having to break up with her. After that, she had a conversation with my friend Joe, and lamented to him about how she'd been so good to me and that was so terrible of me to break up with her. And Joe then told me about this conversation, and he had to explain to her that there was these two main things that she did that really bothered me, to which she said to Joe, well, gee, if Paul had ever bothered to tell me of those things. And he had to tell her that I had told her those things on at least 3 occasions when he had been present. Who knows how many when he hadn't. And Joe said that when he said that to her, her reaction was, quote, well, close quote. Now, that isn't exactly on point, but it illustrates my point in that a lot of times when I tell somebody you should do this or you shouldn't do that, it's quite often ignored or it only strengthens their resolve to do that thing. So before telling me that you're disappointed in me that I didn't talk about politics, yeah, be careful what you ask for. Okay, so with all of that, let's get to what is the Reduction of Gun Violence Act and what does it mean? All right, it can mean a lot of things, but there's primarily 2 that are going to affect what we do here. And as I talk about this, please remember, I am not an attorney. I am not a legal scholar. This is not a discussion of let's talk about what it means to various people. This is me explaining the way I interpreted it when I read the statute and what I may have to do in reaction to it. And the 2 big things are, 1, it will require that I have a permit issued by my local police chief or county sheriff. A lot of people have talked about the state police. I read the statute, and it was very clear, police chief, county sheriff. And I need to get a permit to buy a firearm. So I'll have to take a class, submit some paperwork, and the sheriff's office or the PD will issue me a firearms purchasing permit that will allow me to buy guns. All the guns I already have are okay, but if I want to buy more, I'll need this permit. Well, obviously, that process will eliminate convicted felons and people who can't legally possess firearms. But there's also part of the statute that reads, anyone that the governing agency believes may be a danger to themselves or others, or that they don't want to have a firearm. So pretty much your local law enforcement can exclude you if they don't like you. Now, the other part of this is the prohibition of magazines with capacities greater than 10. There are some exceptions, like permanently attached tube magazines on auto-loading .22 rifles and permanently attached tube magazines on lever-action centerfire rifles. But as far as detachable box magazines, you'll be limited to a magazine capacity of 10 or less. Now, there are some exceptions to that, such as if said magazines are being used for a class or a demonstration that is under the guidance of, or they use the word auspices of, law enforcement. And if you already possessed the magazine prior to the law being enacted, then they're okay. So for example, my 20-shot magazines for my Ruger 5.7 are okay because I already possess them. But there's going to be some limitations on those. Even though it's okay for me to have them, I can only actually use them if I'm on private property or if I am on a private or even a public range. And I cannot use them for any kind of hunting or target shooting on public land. So for example, in a couple of months when the crew and I go on our annual jackrabbit hunt, remember, jackrabbits are not game animals, so there are no magazine restrictions. And we've got our ARs and AKs and our 10/22s with high-capacity magazines. Even though those magazines will be legal for us to possess, we can't use them in that format because that will be on public land. Now, there are some real debatable things about this statute, such as we already have people planning on filing injunctions and filing lawsuits. It is my understanding that the state police that got all this dumped on them, they're supposed to be the ones in charge of figuring out how to teach these classes, who to certify to teach these classes, what's going to be in these classes. Last I heard a couple of days ago, they have no plan on how to enact that. And so what I'm reading now is that they are planning to file for some kind of extension to delay this law taking effect so they can have time to get their act together. So we may very well see a delay of this taking effect. Now, it was passed as part of the election on November 8th, and from what I read, that election will be certified or rectified or something or other, validated on December 15th, and then the law is supposed to take place on January 15th of 2023. And so we'll see if that happens. Now, what will all of that mean for me? Okay, there are some concerns, such as this may make it very difficult for me to buy firearms in the future to do firearms evaluations here. Now, there's some debate, such as when the law takes place, January 15th, one side is saying that's when all gun sales will cease unless you have the permit, while the other side is saying that can't happen because there's no way the permitting process is going to be in place by then, so you can't say people can't buy guns until you, so it may be delayed. So we really don't know when or if that's going to happen. As far as the high-capacity magazine kind of thing, that runs into a few problems. One of those problems is that for guns like my Ruger 5.7, it has 20-shot magazines. I don't really know that 10-shot magazines even exist for it. If they do, I've never seen them. The Kel-Tec CMR30 that you may have seen last week has 30-shot magazines. Again, I don't know that 10-shot magazines even exist for it. If they do, I've never seen them, and I certainly don't have any. So it may put me in the position where I can't even use those firearms. We also have to concern ourselves with the eagerness, for lack of a better word, of law enforcement to enforce this. Now, right now, as we speak, I happen to be in a county where just a couple of days ago, the local county sheriff declared that their agency is not going to enforce this. Well, was that rhetoric, or did the sheriff mean it? I don't know. And how aggressive will they be about enforcing this? Because our local sheriff's office has actually been to this property before. A few months ago, when we were filming the Century Arms AK torture test and we were shooting 1,000 rounds, the neighbors called the police and complained about the noise, and of course lied to the police. Gee, there's a shocker. So the police came out here. So, I mean, the local police know I'm here and know what I'm doing, so are they going to be staking me out, just waiting for their opportunity to take my magazines? You know, I really doubt it. But that's not a completely unreasonable thought process. I do have absolute faith and confidence in our local sheriff's office. But things can change. We also have a part of this Reduction of Gun Violence Act, yeah, I know it's kind of backwards, it's hard to say, is that as I go from my home to this private property to do whatever it is I do, I can transport those magazines, but the law is now going to require that those magazines are in a locked container. So can I expect that between there and here the police are going to pull me over and check that out? See, there's just a lot of unknowns as to the eagerness or willingness of law enforcement to enforce this. Now, there's part of this statute that also makes things a little more difficult, in that it's pretty clear that if you already owned the magazine prior to the enacting of this statute, then it's okay. But it also uses the term, I read the statute online, it uses the term affirmative defense. Now, I'm not an attorney, I'm not a legal scholar, I can only tell you what the attorney told me. The way our legal system is supposed to work is that if you're accused of a crime, then the district attorney has to prove beyond all reasonable doubt in front of a jury or an impartial judge that you did in fact commit that crime. So the way it would work is that I have this magazine. They have to prove that I got it after the statute was enacted. That's not the way the statute's written. It's written with the term affirmative defense, which means that I have to prove that I had the magazine prior to the statute being enacted. And the very simple way to put affirmative defense is that when you're accused of something, you concede that yes, you did that thing, but at the time in the place that you did it, it was legal. Put as easy as I can make it, if someone accuses you of stealing the cookie from the cookie jar, an affirmative defense is, yes, I took the cookie, here it is. But it wasn't a crime because it's my cookie. That's affirmative defense. But when you use an affirmative defense, you have to assert that and you have to prove it. So because they used that term in the statute, that means I'll have to prove that I possessed certain things before the statute was enacted. So I'm not promising anything, but don't be surprised if in the near future you see me sitting here showing, here's a magazine next to a copy of today's newspaper. That might be what we have to resort to. So when you put all of this together, what is my course of action going to be? Well, for the immediate future, it's going to be to do nothing, because there's still a lot of confusion over what some of these different provisions mean, how difficult it's going to be, how expensive it's going to be to get this permit, when they're going to start giving permits. Will the law be enacted before permits can be obtained? How eager will law enforcement be to really take away all those magazines? There's a lot of unknowns. So what am I going to do? I'm going to see how things unfold. And depending on how things unfold, the courts might throw this entire statute out. I'm hoping that our state Supreme Court will do the right thing. As I interpret it, this just can't pass constitutional muster. And they might throw it out and we'll have nothing to worry about. But if it means that I have to relocate to another state, well, then that's what we'll do. So I hope that explained some of it and explained a little bit about my possible course of action. Now this is Clyde and this is Hogan, and they're turkeys who at present are living in my backyard, and they're going to help me illustrate a point. And we're putting this in after we've done the cooking segment. If we put this in before, people would be concerned that I'm going to cook Clyde and Hogan, and no, we're not going to do that. And the point we're making is that when you're talking about turkeys or any poultry, and you're discussing the difference between white meat and dark meat, that's determined by where that meat comes from on the bird. Is it the leg? Is it the breast? It's not determined by feather color. Okay, a few more things to cover. First, let me introduce you to the newest member of the family. Now, this particular breed is technically known as a Borzoi, but for centuries they were known as Russian wolfhounds, so that's usually the term I use when I introduce him to people. And his name is Vodka. You may remember Whiskey, the Irish wolfhound. Unfortunately, dogs don't live forever, so Vodka's the newest member of the family. Now, I have him on a leash because this particular breed loves to chase small animals, and if he sees a rabbit or a squirrel, he's going to chase it, and you won't get him back until he feels like coming back. So for right now, we've got him on a leash. Okay, I told you that I'd tell you another anecdote about buying things at the dollar store. It's Saturday morning. I'm picking up some supplies to go to the range as soon as I'm done at the store, and I have a shopping cart with at least 2 dozen of their 2.5-liter bottles of soda. Get to the checkout line, and the lady behind the counter asks me, "So you have big plans this weekend?" I thought she was just making conversation. I said, "No, I'm on my way to work, so I'm working just like you are." And she gives me this funny look, which I don't pay much attention to because people give me funny looks all the time. Okay, well, I didn't realize until later she was asking me about weekend plans because I have a shopping cart full of soda. Now, when I tell this story, people say that, "Oh, Paul, she was flirting with you," and tell me that I'm obtuse to such things. Well, I may be to some degree, but I think that I've been shot at just about as often as I've had women flirt with me, so take that for what it's worth. Now, another thing I want to discuss, because I know people will ask, that camouflage jacket I was wearing, it's military issue from some European country. I don't remember for sure which one, but I think it was Croatia. I like to wear that when I'm cooking because it doesn't show stains near as much as the hunting coats do. And that just about sums it up for the Thanksgiving special. So, hopefully we've helped you alleviate a little bit of holiday boredom. Thanks for watching, and happy Thanksgiving.